Welcome to Crosstown Cardboard, episode 33, with my great friends who will introduce our guest in just a second. But first, we have to introduce Craig at New York City Sports Cards, the math teacher, the soccer coach from on Long Island, but in New York City, repping the Knicks as always. And myself, Carmine at Carmine's Cards in the virtual world, the sports and news broadcaster, originally from Westchester County, New York, but now in Southern Oregon. And we have a big guest. Actually, big is in his full name now. Craig, would you like to introduce the guest we have on today?
A long time coming that we have Big Ken, a.k.a. Papa Ken, a.k.a. Sports Cards Lessons on Instagram. So excited to have you on, Ken, and just talk cards. We talk behind the scenes all the time, so great to have you. So good to have you. How are you feeling? You've been a busy guy in the hobby.
I've been busy. I'm excited to be here. It's my first time on Crosstown. I was hoping I'd show up and say, "Hey, I'm your third or fourth time guest." I'm beating everybody, but you got to start somewhere. So this is my first stop here on Crosstown. I'm excited to be here. Excited to see my guys. I was thinking that I've done a bunch of Wolfpack stuff with you guys, but this is really the first time that we've done this.
Yeah, we got the pleasure of being on the Sports Card Lessons podcast, I think a couple months ago, and that helped us, get off the ground because you're more experienced, seasoned podcaster. And so now we're up to our Larry Bird, Patrick Ewing, Kareem, Alonzo Mourning honorable mention, episode 33. So, and you've been going to so many shows, Ken. That's one of the big reasons we wanted to have you on, in addition to us being Wolfpack co-members. So what are the recent sports card shows that you've been to? And then we'll get into the different feelings and what you're seeing selling and buying at those shows. But give us like a rundown of the recent shows you've been to.
Well, I could list the last three shows. They were all first-time shows for me. So I did the Shriners show in Massachusetts. I did the Best Flipping show in Massachusetts. And I did the Fenway Park show in Massachusetts. See, there's a theme here, all the Massachusetts, right? And it's interesting that I do all these shows and no two shows are ever the same. They could be right down the road from each other, 1 week apart, and I'll go and it'll be just completely different. The shows are different. What's selling, how it's selling, things like that. No show is ever the same.
Yeah, who knew card shows and snowflakes had so much in common?
Right. So what were some of the differences you noticed, Ken, from the Fenway to the Best Flippin' show to the Shriners?
So Shriners, it was interesting when I went to Shriners. Now Shriners is, usually a huge show, right? I just heard great things about the Shriners show. From the moment I stepped back in the hobby, people really talked about this show. And I was so excited to make plans to go to the show. And I went to the Toronto. I didn't mention the Toronto show here, but
yeah.
I went to the Toronto Expo, and I picked up the Mike Tyson PMG, the Upper Deck Employees PMG card. And when I got home and I started looking on the computer and people were talking about going to Shriners, I saw that Mike Tyson was going to be there. So it was a no-brainer. I know he doesn't sign cards, nor would I break this out of a case to have him sign it. But instantly in my mind, I thought, if I can go there and have him hold this card and take a picture, just to say he's held this card, right? That to me would be really cool. So I made I came back. I was a week back from Toronto. I made plans to go to this show. And the day before I went, I was messaging with all these people and they said, it's been really slow. It's been tough. We went on a Sunday. So Friday and Saturday had been slow. And we'd gone on a Sunday. And so I really didn't know what to expect. Here I am thinking this is supposed to be a banging show and people are talking about it being really slow. And when I got there, I started talking to people. They said there's two different promoters, right? There's a promoter for the Shriners in November, and there's a promoter for this show in the spring. So there are two different promoters.
Oh, okay.
But that show to me was an amazing show. So this is what worked out for me. I went to a show that had been slow for 2 days. So I showed up on Sunday and it was a buying day for me. I mean, I was just table to table, buying, all these great cards to pack away to bring to the National, in July. So I was excited to go. And the day I did, Mike Tyson was late. He was supposed to be there at 1. He doesn't come till 4 o'clock. And I kind of carpooled with people. So I drove up to, I drove an hour and 20 minutes from here and met up with some other people, and they drove the rest of the way. So here I was feeling bad that I was the only one that was waiting to see Mike Tyson that day, but they were really good sports about it. They didn't mind. And yeah, I mean, not only did I get to see Mike Tyson, I got a picture of him holding, with him holding the PMG. And I came home with, a satchel full of cards. So it was that show was a great show.
Ben, we gotta rewind for a second, because here you are picking up these Grail Mike Tyson cards, taking pictures with Mike Tyson with the card, going city to city, setting up at shows. But there are probably many listeners who may not know you, and it didn't just happen this way. To add a little context, you and I connected what, 2, 3 years ago.
Mhm.
You knew Rob because through prison, right? Rob's
I love to say that. Yeah, we met
works
in prison.
you kind of met in prison. You guys kind of met in prison. You being an educator, Rob working in mental health through the prison system, however you want to word it, about 2, 3 years ago. And I knew Rob, and then we kind of connected. And you were pretty new to this 2, 3 years ago, and look how far you've progressed in just
Yeah.
a few years. So you're doing amazing work. But as far as you're collecting, I've seen you evolve, and I love the way you document that on your podcast. So plug for your podcast, Sports Card Lessons. The fact that you went from 2, 3 years ago, you didn't know anything. You were just, you were teaching in the prison, and here you are now. So good for you for a 2, 3 year growth. What's your
Mhm.
secret?
It's just being part of the hobby. It was a perfect storm for me, right? Because I retired. Uh, and when I retired from the prison, this was it was a great way for me to it was something for me to do that really took my mind off of all the other things I was doing in my life. And I run a business too. And once I jumped in, I thought to myself, I wish I jumped into this 20 years ago. I wish I'd been doing this for 20 years, or 10 years or 15 years. But I'm glad at the time that I did jump in, and I love it. I love going to shows. I love, dealing with people, talking to people, and the people in the hobby too are so welcoming. I've talked many times, the older you get in life, the harder it is to make friends. And the older you get in life, it's harder it is to retain friends, because people, their lives change and their kids grow up and this and that, and they move away. So a lot of these people you're friends with for a lot of your life, they seem to go off and do their own thing. And it's not that you lose touch with them, but you're not that active with them, on a daily or weekly basis. And you know going through that transition and retiring and having friends from work and leaving those kind of friends, and my kids, are all grown up, and losing all those friends, they a lot of those people moved on. Now all of a sudden I have hobby friends, right? And it's just been it's been great for me. I love doing it. I look forward, like, all week long when I know there's a show. I'm excited to go.
That's great. So when you lost one thing with your career, you filled that void with the
Yeah,
hobby, it seems
yeah.
like also. So you mentioned the Shriners show with your Mike Tyson awesome moment. What
Mhm.
was Mike Tyson's reaction? And I know you mentioned it on your show, but just for our listeners who might not be
Yeah.
crossing over the same, exact listeners, but can you tell a little bit more in depth what the
So, yeah, it was
interaction was like?
interesting. Mike didn't say much. I was probably 70th in line, right, to get in to see him. And I'm sure it was a late day. It's a long day for him. So he's standing there, he's just waiting for you to come in, and he wants to throw his arm around you, or you throw your arm around him and take a picture. And I kind of walked in and I said, I kind of faced him. I said, "Hey man," I go, "Hey champ," I go, "You know what this is?" And I held it up, and he shook his head no, and he looked at it and he said, "Man, but that purple is fly as F." It made my whole day. Made my
Nice.
whole day. I said, "Would you hold it for the picture?" He said, "Sure." And yeah, it was great. It was a great interaction. Yeah.
That's awesome. So breaking news here: Mike Tyson is a big fan of the color purple. So we got an exclusive, and
Well,
also
well, it's
shout out
probably
to
the first time. It's probably the first time he saw himself in purple, right?
yeah,
I mean,
yeah, could be,
It's cool. I
and
mean,
shout
closest
out.
thing you can get to like an on-card auto, I guess, him holding it.
yeah. Well, at least
So
I
what?
know I could say he held it, and I have the proof.
There you go.
So and shout out to cousin Tony, also another Wolfpack member who also got his employee exclusive Upper Deck PMG
Mhm.
Mike Tyson right around the same time.
Yeah.
So Ken, he doesn't sign. Why doesn't Mike Tyson sign? Do you know?
No, so since he got signed by Leaf, he can't sign any cards. He can sign
Oh,
other
wow.
things, just about anything, gloves, trunks,
Can't see cards.
pictures, anything. He can sign anything, but he can't sign trading cards. Mm.
Okay.
Interesting.
Huh.
Yeah. And
All
I
right.
learned that last year because I was going to meet him for the first time down at the Probstein's Autograph Fest. He was there, and I knew I was going to that show. I knew I was setting up, and I spent a long time picking out the perfect card for him to sign, right? I researched it, and I'm looking and I'm looking and I'm as best you can. You guys do the same thing. It's a raw card. So you're looking at the corners and the edges and the surface and trying to, ask for a few more pictures, that type of thing. And I found the perfect card, right? And I got it and I was all excited. And that day I went when we got to the show and uh my friend Nick, who was there, who was part of, bringing the people and celebrities in and out. And I said, "Oh, I'm excited for Mike. I got this card. Check it out." And he goes, "That's great, but he can't sign it." And I'm like, "What?" He says, "No, he can't sign it." He says he can only sign these things right here, if you buy or if you bring something on your own. So yeah, it was a big disappointment that day, but lesson learned, and it helped me for when it was really important, right?
Right.
Lesson learned.
Yeah,
Look at that.
yeah,
That's your mantra right there, right? Every
yeah.
experience in this hobby is a learning lesson. But speaking of trading cards, Ken, I want to talk about because I haven't been to a show in a few months. This is busy season for me. Carmine, you're in the same boat. So we've been watching from the sidelines, right? We know what's going on. We understand there's a Fenway show last weekend. We understand. I think there was a Dallas show last weekend.
Yep.
We're doing our buying and selling and trading online, but you're in the action. So when you see transactions happening, just people buying, selling, what are you seeing a lot of? What is moving? Is it still all this ultra modern fluff that we're used to seeing get pumped?
In the lane that I'm in, yes, and a lot of the people that I know are in that lane too. It's a lot of with football, it's a lot of modern quarterbacks, from 2017 up to the current players. And I'll tell you one thing that I've noticed, and it was such a change from last year because last year the big cards were moving, all the way up through the spring, right up to the national. You would see these big, optic contender autograph and these RPAs that were 3, 4, 5, 8, $10,000. These big cards were moving. And I used to say, I used to see, and I would talk about this on the podcast. I would see these people I'm setting up with selling these big cards and say, that's where I need to be. Right. So I kind of got into that in the summertime, close to the fall. I moved into a couple big cards. And what I realized, I was too late. I guess, when they say when, you see the trend happening, you're probably too late. And I was too late. So I moved into these big cards. And what I watched happen through the fall and in through this winter, I watched that these big cards really weren't selling anymore. People were trying to trade down out of these big cards. And the more I go to we talked about, I go to all these shows. And what I'm noticing now is people are saying, I would rather have you know, 10 $500 cards in my case than, one $5,000 card, like that type of thing, because this is kind of, where it's moving, a lot of raw cards, a lot of raw cards. I mean, PSA, the grading, the prices on the grading are so low right now with these bulk options and everything else. I mean, there's just a ton of cards being graded now. So at these shows, people are really digging through these singles boxes, trying to find cards. And I know I'm friends with a lot of people that we're carpooling to these shows, and they're coming back and they're showing me stacks of 30, 40 single cards that they've picked up at a show, and they're going to go through them, a second time at home, and they may lose 20 or 25%, may not be gradable after they really review the card, but they're still sending a ton of cards in for grading.
Huh, interesting. Okay, so you're seeing, what's the main price range now, Ken, that you're seeing selling at the shows you're going to?
Oh, I would say from, probably $50 to $500 is probably the kind of the sweet spot where a lot of people are buying, whether it's raw, in the 5 to 50 to maybe even a 75 or 80 on the raw. But then with the slab stuff, I think that $400, $500 range has been kind of a sweet spot. I just see it, and I've been doing the same thing myself. Like I changed up I talked about having this big plan to go to the national, to have all these RPAs. You can go back and listen to my, back in January and the beginning of season 2, I'm talking about having all these RPAs at $2, $3, $4,000. And I completely switched up. I think, most of my cards are under $1,000, what I've ended up switching into and what I plan on bringing, because I think those are the cards that are going to sell. Those are the cards that are becoming more liquid than the higher end cards. Even when I went to Toronto, like I brought high end hockey cards to Toronto. I brought cards to Toronto to sell. And when I brought them around, people were just, I sold all my lower end hockey, but my high end hockey just couldn't sell it. I mean, people would say, look, if you really want to sell it, I'll give you this, but it's because I know I can't sell it, and it's just going to become part of my inventory until these high-end cards start selling again. So, I was obviously, no, I'll just take those cards back with me. But yeah, the high end, from what I see, and people will certainly argue with me that, but the shows I'm going to, not many high-end cards are selling.
Just to your example, you could pick one $5,000 card. I feel like you could build a really sweet, unique, cool collection of 10 $500 cards.
Yeah.
Let's get into it, for example. So, kind of what you're saying, I last year at National, a big lesson for me was I was able to consolidate into a couple soccer cards I really like. So I did like 8 cards and cash for 2 type deal. It was a mega deal, Ken. You would have loved it. So, Ken, this card is right in your sweet spot of like that $200 to $500 range. This is a Brendan Aronson Gold Prism from 2022 Prism World Cup. Out of 10, people seem to love. Tell me if you see this as well. Love Prism Golds. Our last guest said the Panini era is going to be known as the Prism Gold era.
Yeah, so I think one of the problems is if people just are trying to identify like a set that's a little bit more rare than the other million sets that are out there, right? I mean, and that's why people are enjoying those cards there, because they're limited. It's a limited set.
Yeah, pretty easy to identify. It looks good too, right?
Yeah.
I think that's why people like gold prisms. I love soccer, Ken, because my favorite products are Topps Chrome, and they're out of 50, so they still look great, but they're a little more attainable, 5 times more attainable to be exact.
Mhm.
There you
5
go.
times more.
Nice.
They're numbered out of 50, prisms out of 10. There you go.
Right. Oh, this is a math teacher right on
Yeah,
the hand.
yeah.
I mean,
It's another lesson learned.
right,
Yep.
exactly. So, Ken, I'm curious, when you talk about the range, you were mentioning the $50 to like $500 range is now the sweet spot where a lot of transactions are happening. You're seeing it shows. And previously you were seeing, like around this time last year, the higher end stuff, some of the 4-figure stuff was changing hands more. Do you think that's changed mainly because of the economy and inflation and things slowing down in the financial world? Or do you think there are other factors at play that are changing the sports card market a little bit?
Well, I think it's easier to move cards that are less expensive, number one. Number two, if the market dips, right, on one card, you're going to lose the higher dollar the card, the more you're going to lose on one card versus if you're spreading it out. Um, and one thing that I talk about um, is I find the higher dollar cards I have, so the $3, $4, $5,000 card, when it comes time to even try to sell it, people are already discounting, like their offers are coming in, $5, $6, $7, $800 below a comp. Where on a $200 card or a $300 card, if people are going to make an offer or try to get something, say if the comp is at $200, I mean, I think they kind of know in their mind if they can get it at 180 or 190, it's going to be a good deal for them. Versus if a card is priced at $3,000, they may think to themselves, well, I'm going to try to get this card for $2,200 or $2,400. So I think people are expecting a bigger discount or trying to get a bigger discount on higher dollar cards versus lower dollar cards. And I think it's easier to, the math is easier, right? We can ask the math teacher, right? The math is just
The
easier.
only, I know I really want to get into this point for a second, because the only way this works and is a successful hobby is if that card ends up in a collector's hands. Because if a card is worth, if I'm selling a card for 3,000 and you buy it for 2,200, okay, maybe I made a little money. You want to go sell for 2,400, you made a little bit of money. That person wants to sell for 2,600, they made a little money. Someone's going to be holding that, and you hope that that person who's holding that is a collector of the card. Otherwise, that's where we run into issues, I guess. That's where that game of hot potato comes in.
Yeah.
So that's
Somebody's
why,
going to get beat.
personally, I try to acquire these $50 to $500 cards and work my way up to a more expensive card that I want to hold long term.
Mm-hmm.
So that to me is my end goal. But it's nice to like talk it out like this.
Mm-hmm.
Very therapeutic.
I went to the Mount Kisco show in Mount Kisco, New York. I don't know, 3 weeks ago, maybe. I went down there on a Sunday. It was the week after Shriners. And I had a pretty big Mahomes card that I had recently acquired to bring to the National. And then I felt maybe this isn't the card that I really want to bring out there. Like maybe I can turn this card into. And a dealer offered me the last, met the last comp on that card, which I was excited about. And I traded down. I traded down to, there were a couple Mahomes cards, a couple of Joe Burrow cards, right? So it was, and I felt it was a great move for me because even those cards that I traded, I took that card and, I gave the big card, I took, 5 smaller cards. Those 5 smaller cards now have increased in value. They've gone up a little bit in value. Where I go back and look at that Mahomes card, it's gone nowhere. It's stayed right where it is because it's kind of a rare. It's more of a rare card. It's a very low pop card. It was a rookie. It was a numbered card. Things like that. So there's not a lot of them selling versus some of these other cards that I picked up. That there's more of and there's more selling. You can see the comps are going up, and I'm just finding it easier to comp these cards, and I think I'm going to find it easier to move these cards too than something a little bit more unique.
That's an interesting argument, Craig, because a lot of our conversations on Crosstown Cardboard here revolve around getting the more rare cards, the more unique cards that don't have as many comps. But Ken is mentioning that the comps can sometimes work in your favor. Like to your example, talking about football being in more of a down period, but probably on the upswing now that it's getting closer to the season. So if you get less rare cards that are transacted more, that can work in your favor in this case.
Yeah. I have a recent example. Ken, what were you going to say? You are the guest. I want you to get
No, I was gonna agree with you. I talked a lot, and these are the kind of lessons that I go back and forth on my own podcast, right? So I go out and I say, I'm picking up these Ovechkin cards that are very low pop, and I can almost make up the price because one hasn't sold in 3 years or 4 years, and these transactions I'm getting. But what I realized, I got these great deals. I'm like saying, wow, I got these, look at this guy, helped me out, I got this great deal on this card. But then I realized after the fact that he was happy to get out of it, because here is a card that's in his case that he just can't move, because we're saying we think the value is $3,000, but he couldn't even get anybody to offer him $2,000 on it, right? And then I show up and say, well, I'll give you these cards and some cash, and I'll trade up to that big card. Well, now I have that big card, but I can't move that big card, right? Because I'm in the same position he was in. So go ahead, Craig.
No, what you were saying about trading down, because I have that Allen Iverson sneaker spotlight card that I posted. I don't have it in front of me, but every card for me is a card I want to keep, keep in my collection or move. And similarly, that's a kind of a low pop card. There's been some comps on it, but it's a card I plan on moving. And I was really contemplating. It's funny you say that, because we always talk about trading it for the big card. The very last 2 days, I was shopping it around, actually trying to trade down. So my thought process as well was, I'm going to go to National. And one lesson I learned from last year is, yeah, you want to come with cash, but you got to come ready to have some cards, right? National's where everything goes down. Anything goes down. So my favorite way to operate are partial trades. If I want this $1,000 card, give you $500 cash, $500 in cards. For me, that's perfect. So you got to have some inventory. So I could have this one Iverson card that I could try to move into something, or 2 or 3 cards to play around with to try to get a little flexibility with my thought process. But it's got to be the right cards if you're going to trade down, right? You don't want to really trade for too much junk, but I guess in your case, you just got to make sure you get the right value out of it.
Yeah, and I think I did. I ended up with cards with rookie quarterback cards that were graded 9s and 10s, mostly 10s. Like Mahomes optic pink, a Mahomes optic, both PSA 10, like those type of cards that are pretty liquid right now. I mean, they're just kind of flying off the shelves right now. So these are the cards that I want to be holding on to. And again, like I just mentioned, I'm watching. There's comps every day on these cards, and some of the same cards are being resold too. But the comps keep creeping up and creeping up and creeping up, and that's good news for me.
Yeah, and I feel like at those shows, like you said, Ken, those lower value cards, or whatever you want to put a label on them, but between $50-$500 are going to move a lot quicker, especially if you're not at a big show like Dallas, Burbank, some of those. Because, like, for example, I sold one of my Tiger Woods autographs for $3,000 at the Burbank show back in, and it was February.
Yeah.
And I
was thinking of meeting you out there.
That's right. Yeah. We were almost met up. And so I remember, at that show, when there's hundreds and hundreds, I think there was like 500, 700 tables, something like that. Then you'll get buyers for the 4-figure cards, at least in my experience, because I've been to smaller shows like, a Portland show, and there's, 80 tables, 50 tables around there. And, most of the stuff, like the most expensive thing you'll find selling is like $300-$400. So do you think it's more of a function of some of the shows that aren't the major blockbusting nationwide shows, and that's where you're seeing that trend happening?
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of bigger deals go down at the bigger shows, like Dallas and Chicago, not talking about the National, but the Chicago show, and Burbank. I mean, I know a lot of big deals go down, but I think for the most part, the big sales that I see at these shows are really for vintage cards. I mean, like the vintage Mickey Mantles and vintage basketball. Like these are the, I just see so much more money at these bigger shows being spent on the vintage cards than, I mean, I'm not saying that's all there. People are obviously buying, modern cards too, spending good money on modern cards too. But I almost think that, people do shop a lot of these bigger cards around at some of these shows, and I think when they don't sell, they end up on like, some of these like PWCC or Heritage or Golden, things like that. I think that's where they end up. They try to shop them around, and if they don't they don't get anybody to buy, then they end up in the auction houses. And I think they go from the auction houses back to these shows again. Somebody buys them, and now it's right back at the show again, trying to move the cards.
This is kind of back to what we said earlier. It's a never-ending cycle.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess there is no end game in the hobby, right? What is the end game? I'm trying to build out a collection out here. You're just trying to be the best dealer you can, have fun, and you've also yourself. I've seen you turn into a collector over the years.
Yeah.
What are the types of cards you now really like to collect? The stuff you're not going to bring out and sell, but has meaning to you.
Okay, so the stuff the stuff that doesn't make it to a show anymore, any of the Upper Deck Mike Tyson cards that I have, they won't make it to the show. My women's soccer, Trinity Rodman, you'll never see her in my case. I'm hoarding all her cards.
I sure hope you don't have Trinity Rodman in your case.
Another thing I started collecting, PCing, was WNBA Hall of Famers. Right. So
interesting.
Here's I think all of women's sports are, very, very undergraded right now. And I do a lot with the soccer, and I'm building not only my own PC for soccer, but I'm building up, a whole showcase for this summer for the World Cup. So looking forward to that. And any of those cards that'll go in there, if they don't sell, I'll be happy to keep them.
And the new Donruss soccer product looks really nice. I love those, and the optics too. So I see you picking up some of those. That's good stuff. WNBA cards. Are you picking up any Rittenhouse cards? I remember ripping packs of WNBA Rittenhouse, pulling a couple of jersey cards back in the day. What do we got here?
Oh, you can't see. I'm pointing to cards that you can't see.
Describe it. Describe it using the best imagery possible.
Wow. Because these
are. Meanwhile, I picked up this Tim Howard. You know Tim Howard, U.S. national team goalie?
Yep.
Match worn patch card. Look at that.
That is very
nice.
The match worn patches are nice.
Match worn, really nice logo. And here's a fun one you guys might like. You remember Freddie Adu?
Oh yeah, he was what was he, 15 when he went pro?
14. He was 14.
Wow.
Ken, do you remember Freddie Adu?
I worked with a guy who was a huge soccer guy, and when this kid was 14, every day he used to tell me this story about anything that was going on with this kid, and it was funny. I forgot about that till you just mentioned his name.
So here's a 2012. Yeah,
he's long retired now, right? Because I'm retired.
He might be playing somewhere, but here's a 2012 Freddie Adu, obviously game worn patch out of 35, jersey number out of 35.
Nice.
Freddie Adu, I feel like you can't tell the story of American soccer without Freddie Adu.
Yeah. No, that's great.
So that was a fun couple soccer patch pickups for me.
Yeah, he was a trailblazer.
Here's just a couple of the Rittenhouse. This is Adela Dawn here. So these are the original. These are 2013s.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, so is that the first year they made WNBA cards?
No, but for these particular set that they put out, and I don't have all the information on it, but like this one here is Brittany Griner, right? I have a number of her cards, but I think she will be a Hall of Famer. Diana Taurasi, Sue Bird.
Nice.
I have. These are the only two I could grab behind me, but you know what's kind of cool about this too is living in Connecticut. A lot of these, goats from the WNBA went to UConn.
Yeah.
So just in the state, there was so many people who used to follow, or still do, just diehard, women's college basketball. And now, like in Facebook Marketplace, things like that, these cool cards are just popping up, and people are asking like $10 or $15 because they think there's no value to these cards, right? And I'm excited every day. It's part of my routine every day as I just skim through Marketplace for any of those cards, and a lot of them are either from UConn or could be draft cards.
Yeah, you might have to get some Brianna Stewart, some Maya Moore,
Oof.
Tina Charles, Nafisa Collier.
We
It's
got to
funny.
get to it.
All those people you just mentioned, I have here all autographed.
Oh, nice. There you go.
All autographs. Yep. These are all Prism autographs. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And Ken,
I think
do you
that's
have, the upper deck Mike Tyson that I sold you like a couple months ago.
Yeah. That's an unbelievable card. And there's a list that somebody put out of all the cards. If you're a Mike Tyson collector, these are the cards you should have. And that was one of the cards that I thought to myself, there's no way I'll ever find one of these cards, just going through the list, because the upper deck autographed Mike Tyson cards from 2012, 2014, 2016, they just don't come up. People have them, they put them away in a case somewhere, and they never come back up again. And when you ever posted that card, I almost fell off the chair. I'm like, I couldn't message you fast enough to say, I'm taking the card.
It sounds like I should have asked for more money. I didn't know it was such a premium.
You did a great job, Carmine.
Love that.
Was a good deal. That was a good deal.
Love to see a card go from one friend to another that ends up in his collection. Like Ken, you sold me the Justin Bieber card that is happily in my PC. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. And I was happy to give it to you.
My man.
That's one thing, that we all the buzz now is the national, right? And last weekend when I went to the Fenway show, I sold a ton of music cards. I hadn't sold any music cards I can't even all the shows that I've been at, maybe a handful, maybe 5 total. And I think I sold like 12, 13 music cards at Fenway. And I was blown away, and the people were so excited. And I have so much information about the sets that these cards came from, and people wanted the information, and we were having these great conversations, and it just got me thinking when I left. I said, I'd love to have, continue to do that. And then I got excited thinking, at the National, there is somebody in that room for every type of card in that room. So no matter what you collect, you will find your people in that building, right? And be able to walk around and see other people that are selling similar cards as you, because I'm sure when I go out there, I'm going to see some of the same cards that I'm selling where I don't see them at any of these shows. I'm the only guy that has these shows. And it didn't hurt either to have Taylor Swift cards when Taylor Swift was playing that weekend at Gillette Stadium, so I sold out all my Taylor Swift cards. Yeah.
Wow. Who would have thought Swifties are in the sports card, or I just guess the trading card hobby, but that's great. So can you go into a little more depth, Ken, about your experience at the Fenway card show? Because that's a pretty unique deal with
I think about that.
Costa Cards is now creating all these Boston centric shows at the different sporting venues. That's awesome. So what was that whole scene like there?
You know what? I will tell you, it started off a little negative. I showed up and I thought to myself, I was shaking my head. I thought to myself, we got there on time and there was a big line waiting to get in. When was the only time ever you've gone to a card show where there was a line you're waiting to get in as a dealer, right? For setup. But they were going through your bags. They were checking your bags and your boxes and stuff like you were going to a concert. And I thought, I go, this is going to be a long morning, right? And the parking, was supposedly somebody was complaining it was really far away, which was getting me aggravated. But then I realized it was like 2 blocks away. It wasn't that far. And then when we got in, I realized we were kind of outside. We were underneath. Now I want to say the bleachers, but it's cement above us. But if you look to the front and to the back, you're looking outside. And they were calling for heavy rains all day on Saturday, so I was like, I think we're in for a long day. And I tell you, when that show started, the people kept coming and they never stopped coming. It was just an unbelievable experience. Um, at card shows, I use about 40%, 30 to 40% of the people that come through now, I've seen before, I know, I've talked to, there was here, I would say I only probably knew 5 or 8%. There was a whole other group of people that I'd never seen before and not very far away from other shows that I'm doing. But yeah, and it was just a phenomenal show. I mean, they advertised it well. They really brought people in for that show. It was, I all my negativity went out the door when that show opened at 9 o'clock. So
So when you talk about a good show versus a bad show, like what makes it good aside from obviously when you do well in sales? I guess
yeah,
it's just number of transactions. Is that really what it comes down to?
there's a few ways I always say to look at a show, and it's interesting because the people that I set up with a lot, right? At the end of the day, they always say, "How did you do?" I did blah blah, and they usually throw a dollar amount out, which is okay because you can measure that. You're setting up as a dealer, and you're there to make money. It's okay to do that. Um, I kind of measure a show myself of how many people that I have great interactions with. So if it's crowded and people are just coming up, and I think it's the teacher part of me too, that I just enjoy the communication, the interaction with people. I think if you do all that well and you know what you're talking about and you know your product that you're selling and you know how to communicate with people, everything else is easy. The sales are very easy. And I have a lot of people who come back to my table. What do you have? What do you have new? Like they'll say this type of thing because they're looking, and I usually give people decent deals on stuff. I'm not there to make a killing. The money, and I know people are going to say, "Oh, everyone says that," but the money really to me is secondary. If you really know me, the money on that whole thing is secondary. I'm happy if I can trade into a card for my PC. I'm happy if I'm selling something over there and somebody shows up and says, "Oh, are you buying?" and they pull out like a Brittany Griner card like this. I'm excited to say, "All right, let's make a deal," and I'll move it into that. So if I left the show at the end of the day with no money in my pocket, but some great cards to come put in this case behind me, it was a great day, right? So there some days on that particular show, right? I didn't get out to walk around because it was so busy all day to go shopping. I also didn't where we were positioned, we were so far to the back that I don't think people had any good cards left. Like there were very few people came in, and it was an odd show that people were selling. Where towards the end of the day, people are like, "Are you buying?" Yeah, yes, I am. But there are cases that obviously been picked through. By the time they got to me, probably 30 other dealers or 40 other dealers had looked at these cards and said, "No, I'm not interested." And they got to me, and I probably wasn't interested either. The only card I went home with that day was this Lisa Leslie Prism autograph,
Nice.
and a friend of mine who was my neighbor before I moved came up to the table, and it was a gift. He came up and said, "I saw this. I knew you'd love this card. I picked it up. It's for you." So this was the only card I went home with that day. Best card I've got in a long time. Right? So it's just
Isn't that nice? Listen, Ken, the last 3 minutes of what you had to say, everyone should listen to that when they said about a show. What a positive outlook on what it means to have a successful show, and I agree.
yeah.
I couldn't agree more. You know, and I think you do have a point about being an educator. I realized as a teacher what makes it fun are the interactions and the relationships you make with students that maybe they last temporarily, but for a lot of them they last beyond graduation. This
Mhm.
is the same exact way, right? You hope to have good positive interactions during the show and then the friendships that either begin and take on a life of its own after the show, even better.
Yep, absolutely.
So, Ken, your podcast, of course, is Sports Card Lessons. Your Instagram is sportscard_lessons. And so, as one of our final questions here, as we start to wrap up, Craig and I wanted to ask, what's the biggest or the best sports card lesson you've learned in the hobby and that you want to give out to the people we so thankfully have listening to us here?
Oh, the best lesson I've learned in the hobby. I wish you would have given me that just a little earlier. Let me think about it a
Sorry.
little, come back with, something big. But um, I think, and I just kind of talked about this too, I think just being a good person in the hobby, if you're going into this hobby that you need to make money, or you need to get the best, you know, transaction, like you need to get the better end of a transaction, or you're going to get mad at somebody if they don't want to negotiate. There's all these like kind of, and I call them these kind of negative things like that people could bring. And if you're bringing any of those things, because I'm a positive person, right? And I talk about, I worked in a prison, for maximum security prison, for 30 years, right? And I created a positive environment in my classroom, and I was able to do that successfully. So coming into this hobby, it's very easy for me to say, everything that's happening around me, it's going to be positive stuff. And I tell people all the time, when I'm starting to do a deal with somebody and they're, they don't. I have a guy, right, and I'm friends with him. We did one deal once, but he always has to get the best part of the deal, no matter what happens. He needs to, and he will stay there and go and go and go. And I told him, you can't always. It's give and take. Some days you get a better deal, some days you don't. But it's about, got to be about the love of the card and not the dollar amount on the transaction. Because if you get stuck on the dollar amount on the transaction, you're really not in the hobby, right? You're really just, you're here for the money. And I think if you come here to this hobby strictly for the money, you're gonna burn out and you'll be off doing something else. You won't last in the hobby if it's strictly for money. You have to love these cards. When you look at these cards, they have to give you a feeling. They have to do something for you to say, wow, this card makes me feel good, or it just does something, to your psyche. Because if it doesn't, if you're here only for the money, it's not going to work out for you. And I don't know if that's a very broad lesson or not, but that's kind of my lesson. Because when I showed up, I had people in my ear talking about, oh, you could buy this for this and sell it for that, and this, and you make this, and it's 10%, and if it's this, you gotta, it was all these numbers and money, and I was like, well, why do I have to do it? What happens if a kid comes up and I just want to give them the card, or I want to give them to them for 25% of comps? Oh, well, why would you ever do that? Well, why wouldn't I? I mean, it would make me feel good. It would make him feel good. Why wouldn't I want to? So all of a sudden, I'm bringing something else to this space, right? And people disagreed with it, but it's who I am.
Amen. And obviously we want to make money along the way because that allows you to keep doing this. But well said, Ken. You are very wise. You're very wise. You are the Ninja Turtles. What was their leader? The really wise, like you're Zordon. You
I
are
remember
our.
the Power Rangers. It was like somebody talking in like a lit up, like a sun or a cloud or
I
something,
am. I
right?
am looking on it on my screen as we
Oh,
speak. His name is Zordon, and you are our Zordon because you are our wise leader.
I was thinking Teletubbies once you said
No,
face in the sky.
way off there.
But either way, Ken, we really appreciate the time and all of your sports card lessons and your knowledge of what's moving and what's not at the shows. And just like you said, the positive atmosphere that you helped create here on Crosstown Cardboard. So it was great to have a fellow Wolfpack member on the podcast here. And I think it was long overdue for you to come on the show.
Yes. Thanks for having me. This was a great time. I was excited to be here, and I think we should all get together and do a big Brady Bunch Wolfpack before right before the National, like
Yeah.
July. Just get us all on one and just chop it up.
That is a fantastic idea.
That's a good idea. I'm down for it.
All right,
All right.
Ken, we'll see you soon enough. Can't wait to give you a big old hug.
Carmine, I'm going to meet you for the first time in person.
Same.
I know.
Same.
I
Gonna meet you for the first time.
Yeah, I haven't met you, Craig, or you, Ken, or any of our Wolfpack members in person being on the West Coast. So national is our big plan. And me and Ken are planning to be roommates with Rob, our buddy, the sports card therapist who we mentioned, saying he's sleeping on the floor. What a humble road for
He was
Rob to
giving the
take.
bed up for you.
Wow. See, that's a very humble approach. That's very nice.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
All right.
episode 33. Thanks, Ken. Anything you want to add before we say goodbye here?
Nope, that's it, fellas. Thank you. I appreciate it, and I had a great time.
All right. Peace.